Listen Lanarkshire is a community radio station governed by the registered charity Getting Better Together Limited. Therefore, the radio station itself retains political neutrality, and any political views or comments aired as part of political discussion programming or otherwise are not the views of Listen Lanarkshire, nor of Getting Better Together Limited. The station has a set of key commitments found on the Ofcom website, and we adhere to all necessary Ofcom rules. For more information or inquiries, please contact us at radio@shotshealthyliving.com.
Good evening, folks, and welcome back to What's the Point, the podcast where the spin gets stripped away, egos get bruised, and real politics gets put back on the table, whether that suits it or not. I'm your host, Greg Lennon, broadcasting online tonight and partially live from the studio. Yes, we're doing things a wee bit differently. The first part's pre-recorded, but don't worry, we'll be back in the studio later for the usual hijinks, heckling and deep dives into the murky puddle that is North Lanarkshire politics. And listen, just because it's pre-recorded doesn't mean we're going away easy. I know some councillors out there would have been hoping for the night off. Well, I'm sorry, not sorry. You're never safe when we've got the mic and a Wi-Fi signal. Because when we talk about Scottish politics, Gerry, there's one issue that never quite leaves the room, or in our case, the chamber, and that is independence. And yet, for all the rallies, the hashtags and waving of flags, we're still miles from the starting line. And never mind the finish. This weekend, the SNP doubled down again. Both votes SNP is still the only route to Indy, apparently. But more folk, especially within the movement, are starting to say what everyone's thinking. That road's been shut since 2014, and the diversion signs are looking very Alba-shaped. So tonight we're asking questions they won't. It's time to dump the failed sat-nav and let someone else take the wheel. But that's not all. There's a real hunger growing for politics. Doesn't speak to sound bites or spreadsheets. Our politics is about dignity, solidarity and socialism, not slogans, selfies or spin. Old school values with urgent relevance. And of course, a man joining me tonight that needs no introduction. It's the Bellshill Bowler himself, my old pal Gerry Brennan. Gerry, how are you?
Very well, Greg, and as always, it's an extraordinary pleasure to be in your company. Thank you.
I'm sure it is, Gerry. And for your information, Tommy, Gerry's best known locally for the creation of the Jarrox trademark and patent pending. A bold combination of Jesus sandals, Crocs and Primark's finest fresh white socks. He's a man like Moses at Moses' chaired committee and had strong views on potholes. Anyway, Gerry, we've got a stonkery of guests tonight, and tonight...
Don't we just...
Well, somebody's never needed a spin doctor, never dodged a scrap, never backed down for saying what he needs to say. Tommy Sheridan, welcome to What's the Point. How are you, Tommy?
Greg, thanks very much for the invitation, pal. Thanks for inviting me to have a blether with you and Gerry. I'm fine. I've got good health. I've got good physical health, which the older you get, the more you realise how valuable having your health is. Some people go on and on about a lot of consumer goods and having a nice car and having nice clothes and all the rest of it. And the older you get, the more you realise it's just a lot of pish, because the most important thing is your health, and sometimes you can't buy your health. So as long as we're healthy, Greg, then we've got something in life, something that a lot of other people sadly don't have. So no, I'm fine, mate. I'm fighting fit.
Brilliant, excellent. Well, honestly, it's a pleasure to have you on, Tommy. And on that health part, here's hoping we don't end up in a medical insurance state come the next couple of years if the polls are correct and we end up in a reform country. That's for sure. Anyway, let's get started. Gerry, where do you want to start?
So, listen, well, with such an illustrious guest, with such a colourful history, I'd probably like to ask Tommy, where did it all begin? From a political standpoint, we kind of got really to know you during the poll tax protests around about late 80s and early 90s. But prior to that, were you engaged in politics, or were you just, somebody like ourselves who, watched the news, slowly but surely got interested in things and then naturally progressed onto the streets, so to speak? How was it for you?
I think for a lot of guys of my and your generation, Gerry, modern studies at school was a massive influence on me. It was the one topic at school that I enjoyed, that I looked forward to. We were actually discussing things that were on the news that night instead of discussing the history was all ancient and the English was all prose that I wasn't aware of, and I wasn't an avid reader, unfortunately. I wish I was. Maths and physics and chemistry just meant nothing to me. But modern studies actually it made me interested, made me sit up and take notice. I remember I was at Lourdes Secondary at 76. I started in 1976. So from 76 right through to 1980, 81, there was a lot going on in the world, in the Middle East and Ireland, and that became my sort of a special studies courses. I was studying what was happening in the north of Ireland at the time and the occupation of the troops, the British troops in there, and I did special studies and discussions and wrote to MPs and all that stuff, and it was just all relevant because I would discuss things with my teacher in school and then go home at night and it was on the news. So it just was something that perked my interest. That Gerry, and I have to say my mum was a massive influence on me. My mum was a very, very clever woman, but she left school as a lot of people in her age, of that generation did. She left with no qualifications. She did cleaning jobs, she did pub jobs. That was most of her life. But while she was working in the pubs, she started to get involved with the trade unions. She joined the PGWU as it was then. It's now morphed into Unite, but in those days it was the Transport and General Workers Union. And she became a steward, became an organiser, and she was very, very active in getting fellow bar staff to join unions. In those days they didn't have a union. They had very little good conditions, Gerry. They had terrible wages. At the end of the night they had to work late to clean up. They had to get their own way home. Had to spend their own money to get home, even though there was no buses left because by the time they shut the pub. So all of that was dead important, and my mum got involved and she got them organised and began to get them overtime pay, began to get them taxis, money for taxis getting home. Had a big strike against Tenant Caledonia. Tenant Caledonia was the biggest brewer at the time, and they refused to recognise the union. They wouldn't negotiate with the union. This was in the mid-70s, and my mum and her fellow stewards, they organised a strike, and Tenant Caledonia was laughing at them, saying, "What are you going to do? Pick at all the pubs in Glasgow? Don't be stupid. We're never going to give in to you." My mom and our fellow stewards, most of them women, they didn't pick at the pubs. They picketed the brewery. And in those days, all the lorry drivers were on the TGWU, so they refused to cross the picket line. So within 2 days, the strike was won, and the Tenant Caledonian had to recognise the union. So all of that was going on in the background of my house, Gerry. My mum was always going to meetings, always going. She was involved with the battered wives movement as well. She was always helping people. So all of that had a mark on me growing up, and my sisters. And my dad, he was a small P politics. He wasn't into party politics, but my dad helped to run the local football team, Paul United. He was the manager. Right. As my mates will tell you, that's how I got a game for the team. But
it's still the case now. It's still the case now with the walking football.
I'm back with politics. Isn't it brilliant, Gerry? You know, I started politics at under 10s. I'm now 61 and I'm still playing with politics. How good is that?
I can vouch for that. I was playing, not against them, but we shared a venue a few weeks ago at the walking football. Tommy's team are in the Premier Division, whereas my wee team, Motherwell Phoenix, we're just starting out, but we're coming for you, Tommy. We're coming for you. I was going to say,
sold it a wee bit there, Gerry. We're not just in the Premier, we're the champions of the Premier.
The champions of the Premier.
Come on.
About that, I did watch him lifting the cup, Greg. But just listen to the stories there that you're talking about, history, your mum, and my mum was the same. She was a shop steward in Bellshill Maternity in Newpie, and modern studies teachers. So, like, for people, young guys in particular of our generation that did get involved in politics, there tended to be that those relationships. It was an inspirational teacher, and it was somebody in the house, either your mother or your father. And in my house, My dad was political with a small p, but my mother certainly was. She was far more vocal. And in your case, it strikes me that the apple did not fall far from the tree at all.
I've got a disclosure. I've got a disclosure
Sorry,
at this point. Sorry, Tommy. I've got a disclosure for you because it's a little known fact. I was an apprentice in Glasgow City Council as part of the gardening team. And you're the reason I get involved in politics, believe it or not.
The hell, Gerry?
Because when I was 17 years of age, you came stoating out and you came onto a site where all us apprentices were all working. And I never seen my gaffers jump so much in all my life at just the prospect of a politician coming on site to inspect a site. And I always remember, and I just looked, and having any Glasgow City Council gaffer at that time, like, basically pander to the idea of a politician being on site. I thought, my goodness, that's exactly what you want. Then I started to read about you, and I always thought to myself, if that's the style of politics that can get things done, then that's something which I thought at that time was something that was widespread, but it clearly wasn't.
What year would that have been, Greg, approximately?
Oh,
Can you
God,
remember?
we're going back to
1865.
I wish it was the case. It would have been about 97, 96,
97, right, okay. Because
96, 97.
I was elected to the council in 92 for prison. I was in Stockton jail at the time, and I got elected in 92, and I was a councillor from 92 until 2003. So I was 11 years in the council. I didn't get elected to the Parliament until 99. So I must have came as a councillor to inspect the site or whatever it was.
You're going back, you're going way back.
In those days, there was a bit of, when I went into the council, up until then, Greg, it was quite a monolith, as unfortunately a lot of councils were in those days. All you needed to do is say you were Labour, and it didn't matter whether you were a numpty or no, you got elected. But when I went into the council, we started to actually ask questions at council meetings, and we started to oppose everybody going on the fucking trips to China and trips to Paris to look at rose gardens and all that, and we started questioning the expenses. So they absolutely hated me in there because it was a very comfortable job up until then. And all of a sudden I started asking all these questions. And the Evening Times newspaper, you'll have the equivalent out in the Lanarkshire area, you'll have local newspapers that are interested in all that stuff. The Evening Times lapped all up because they were like, oh, for God's sake, at last somebody's actually asking questions. So I've got to say, at that time, I mean, by the way, don't get me wrong, I got elected 3 times, Greg. So I got elected in 92, I got elected in 95, I got elected in 99. So I must have been doing something right. It wasn't just a one-off. But the good thing was I actually tried to represent people to the best of my ability. And that's what's important with politics, that you actually do your best.
Quick question. Did you ever get reported to the Standards Commission?
No. Funny enough, no. I say funny enough because I was while I was serving as an MSP, I was put in the jail twice for Paz Lane protests.
I think you get the medal.
You would have thought that they would have maybe tried to report me to Standards, but do you know what? I think they realised it would backfire. Because imagine if they had done that, I would have given me a platform to stand up and say, listen, the ones who should be reported to Standards are all you lot who are there because you're all supposed to be against nuclear weapons. What the hell are you doing about it? Which was bugger all, there was all talk, but none of them would actually go to the Faslane demonstration. So, I've never been reported to Standards now.
Sorry, Greg.
You go.
I was going to say, so 99 begins the life of the new Parliament for the first time since 1707, and you're there at the first swearing in. You don't serve just one term, but you serve 2 terms when you're in there. Tell us a wee bit about those early days in the Scottish Parliament, and did the hopes and aspirations that you had when you entered, were they the same when you left, or was there a degree of despondency?
Good question, Gerry. I would say that it was quite a surprise because I was representing a very small party. I'd been elected to the council, as I say, from prison. away back in 1992. I'd been put inside for opposing a warrant sale. I was interdicted against trying to interfere with this warrant sale in Glasgow in October the 1st of 1991, and I ignored the interdict. In fact, I tore it up in Turnbull Street at the warrant sale, and we stopped the warrant sale, and then I was subsequently charged with contempt of court and given 6 months in prison in Saughton. So I was in prison in 92 for opposing warrant sales, and then I was elected in 99 to the Scottish Parliament, where the first thing I did was introduce a private member's bill to abolish warrant sales. And it therefore has a wee bit of a nice circle about it, that, you know, I get put away for opposing something that I felt was a humiliating piece of legislation that had been used in the Highland clearances hundreds of years ago and was still getting used to frighten people who couldn't afford to pay their debt. And obviously the biggest debt that I was fighting against was the poll tax in those days. And here I was in the modern Parliament actually introducing a law to get rid of warrant sales. And Dennis Cannon, I always remember Dennis, when I approached Dennis to ask him if he would support my bill, because in those days, in order to have a private member's bill, you had to get cross-party support. So you can't go into the Parliament and just say, oh, I've got an idea and I'm going to forward this. You need to go and get people from at least 3 of the parties that are in the Parliament to back your proposal. So I got Dennis, who was a independent at the time, by Falkirk, but I also got John McCallion for the Labour Party, and I got Alec Neil from the SNP. So me, Alec and John in particular, we formed like a wee triumvirate, and we introduced this measure. And Dennis said to me, Tommy, I'm so pleased for you. I've tried at Westminster 4 times to abolish warrants, and not once have they made the time for the bill to be heard. You've tried it once and it's on the agenda, and as it happened, it went against the grain. It wasn't supposed to happen, but we actually won it. And in 2001, the abolition of warrant sales bill became the first ever private members bill passed in the new Scottish Parliament. So it was quite an accolade in that respect.
Absolutely,
Gerry. So I was pleased about that. And then we didn't rest on our laurels. What I did is I got in touch with John and Alec, and I said, look guys, where do we go from here? What about free school meals? What about healthy free school meals for all the Wains? And let's stop all this crap where you get humiliated as a Wain because you need to wait in the queue to get your free ticket. And everybody knows if you're getting a free school dinner ticket, then it means you must be poor. It's just ridiculous. So what we wanted to do was, first of all, tackle the stigma of getting a free school meal, but also tackle the very, very real health problems that we've got in terms of diabetes too, in terms of lack of nutrition. We wanted to make the school meal not only free, but we wanted to make it healthy as well. So we introduced the free and healthy school meals bill. And we lost that one, unfortunately, very sadly. We lost that one in 2002. We lost the vote. But by Christ, we won the arguments. We won the arguments hand down, and we had the whole of civil Scotland was on our side. All the anti-poverty groups, the trade unions, everybody was on our side. Unfortunately, the bloody Tories and Labour and Liberal, they all got together to vote it down, which makes me really pissed off now, because the Liberals go on and on now about how they all support free school meals, but when they had the chance to actually introduce them, they opposed them. So those first 4 years in the Scottish Parliament, Gerry, were very, very exciting, because it was a new Parliament in terms of the first one since 1707, and it was always described as a rainbow Parliament, because it had somebody like Dennis Canavan, who was elected as an independent. It had somebody like Margaret MacDonald, an independent. It's somebody like Robin Harper for the Greens, somebody like me for the Socialists. So it was a rainbow alliance of people that would have never happened under a first past the post. None of us would have been, well, actually, Dennis would have been elected first past the post. You see, he won his actual seat. But me and Margot and Robin, we wouldn't have been elected. And then later, Dorothy Grace Elder left the SNP, became an independent, so she was a radical voice as well. So it was a Parliament that was in the traditions of Scottish politics. It was uppity. It was the willing to just bend the knee and touch the forelock. We actually introduced things and talked about things that we weren't supposed to. So from my point of view, it was a very good parliament. But the reason I say about the unexpected thing, the threshold to get elected in Glasgow, I stood in the Glasgow list for the purposes of the Scottish Parliament elections. Not everybody is aware of this, but you get 2 votes. You get a vote for your constituency MSP, but then you get a vote for what's called your list MSP or your regional MSP. So I stood in the region of Glasgow, and in order to get elected, you needed to get a minimum of 6% of the vote. So of everybody who used the list vote, which a lot of people refer to as your second vote, and I don't like that because it's not about figures, because you don't ever use a 2. It's just a different ballot paper. It's a different coloured ballot paper. And we needed to get enough people to give us the list vote. Now, as it happened, I got about 6.2%, right? So I got out the margin by like 0.2%, and I got elected. I was actually elected. Every region elects 7 regional MSPs. And I got elected as number 6, so I wasn't even the 7th one. So I got in as the number 6 out of the 7 that was elected. However, by 2003, the reason I've told you that story, it's important, because by 2003, although I got 6.2% in 1999, by 2003, my party got 22% of the list vote, and we actually elected 2 MSPs instead of 1. So it shows you that if you go into the parliament and you actually fight for the things that matter, and you try and tackle injustice and poverty, and you put forward a vision of saying that things can be better, you actually can win support, you can build support. So that's a lesson that I think all the politicians, including myself, we have to always bear it in mind, that you don't go in there to be a talking shop. You go in there to raise things that matter to people's lives.
So that's a lovely segue. No, it's a lovely segue, because there's a number of points that you've raised, Tommy, especially that resonate with us. Even going back to your council days and how you approached the council, we find a lot of similarities in that. We are the sort of only grouping of councillors that ask really, really difficult questions, not because we want to, because it's our job. I think that a lot of people have lost faith in politicians now in regards to actually doing what's right for their constituents and the people that elected and put them into that position in the first place. Now, I'm going to touch on a subject. You kind of highlighted what it was like to get into the Holyrood at the very, very beginning, but now we're at a stage where you're looking to try and get back in after a number of years being out the sort of mainstream political sort of process. This time, I'm right in saying you've hooked up with Alba in relation to obviously standing as a candidate potentially for their regional list positions. With the announcement at yesterday's SNP conference that the SNP seems to be going down this road again, this tried and tested failed road that both votes SNP, how frustrating must that be, especially when there's an opportunity to create an independence alliance in that parliament?
Very, very quickly, Greg, the history of my involvement with the parliament and with the socialist politics is quite well known. We had a big row around about 2006 that led to a split. I formed a different organisation called Solidarity, which was also for an independent socialist republic, but it was difficult to have SSP and Solidarity fighting for the same votes, so to speak. So when I stood in the 2007 election to be returned for a third time, believe it or not, I get beat with a percentage point. So I narrowly missed out. But the truth is, if you examine the results, even if there hadn't been a split, I would have been the only one elected. Because if you look at what happened in the 2007 election compared to the 2003, it was utterly polarised. It was utterly polarised to the extent that people weren't willing to give their second vote to another party. Roll on to 2015, 2016. 2015, Greg, we've got to understand in future years when people teach Scottish politics and Scottish history, they will mark 2015 as the tsunami, as the political tsunami, because you and me and Gerry, we could never imagine as we're growing up a situation, a general election, a Westminster general election, where Labour gets one seat. It's one seat in the whole of Scotland. It's just unbelievable to think that was happen, right? But that's what happened as a result, directly, of the marvellous independence campaign of 2014. A campaign that was full of enthusiasm, full of optimism, full of hope. The organisation I helped to form was called Hope Over Fear. We were inspired by Nelson Mandela, who said on several platforms, may your life's choices be informed by hope, not by fear. And that's what we tried to promote in terms of our vision for an independent Scotland. And what we realised, of course, because I was a big advocate of voting SNP in 2015 at the general election. By the way, and not a lot of people know this, but my party at the time, the Solidarity Party, we had a massive split because a lot of my members, a lot of good people, by the way, people who had stood in picket lines for years, I consider them close friends, but we split politically because they wanted us to stand in the election in 2015 as Solidarity, and I had argued that we had to learn the lessons of the referendum, which was the Unionists stuck together. The Unionists got together and they outvoted us. We had to do the same at the general election. Instead of us having split votes, it would be better if we concentrated on the most likely party to win. And of course, the most likely party to win in 2015 was the SNP. So I went out my soapbox and called for people to lend their vote to the SNP. And obviously, it was the right thing to do because we got absolutely whacked, all the unionist politicians, and we had that election. But what people then didn't understand, Greg, and this pissed me off for the high heavens, because what they didn't understand, by the time the 2016 Scottish election comes around, because of the way the DeHont voting system works, and I can understand, you make even the name DeHont, as soon as you see it, everybody laughs, for fuck's sake, what are you going on about now? Take the brandy off him and all that. So I can understand why people's eyes will glaze over. But it is important to understand that the voting system that was introduced in 1999 was deliberately designed to stop any one party ever getting an overall majority in the Scottish Parliament. So it means factually, and this isn't me just talking fish, this isn't me, people accuse me of this in 2016, or you're just saying this because you want people to vote for your party. My argument in 2016 was quite clear. Give your constituency vote to the SNP, because that is the biggest independence force. And regardless of whether you like everything they're doing or not, if you support independence, vote SNP. But if you give the SNP your list vote, you're not only wasting your votes, bad enough that you waste your vote, but it's worse than that. You're actually electing unionists, because if you give your list vote to the SNP, it doesn't count. SNP got over a million list votes, didn't count. Never get any seats. And it was pathetic.
Tommy, last month you said something like that. You mentioned, I think, that you believed that it was a unionist strategy, and that independence voters were actually voting for a unionist strategy. Do you still believe that that's the case today? And if so, what would your message be to SNP supporters coming up to the election next year?
Gerry, I believe even firmer now than I did in 2016 when I first raised it. And by the way, when I raised it in 2016, I've got to say to you, there was quite a few independence forces who didn't quite agree with me. None of them now, right? But at the time, because it was relatively new, they were saying, oh, is that true? By the time we get to 2021, people had realised that I was right. But see now, Gerry, I could understand. I'm going to be kind here. I could understand a way back in 2016 that some SNP supporters would say, oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He's just saying that to get us to split our votes and all the rest of it. I can understand it, right? But see, once the result come in and you saw that over 1 million votes didn't count for anything. I can't accept that you do it again in 21.
Yeah.
Even worse, worse, Greg. They're now saying, the SNP saying, do it again. Now, what is the definition? One of the definitions that psychiatrists use of madness is to do the wrong thing over and over and over again. If you keep hitting your head off a wall and the wall doesn't fall down, you don't
wonder why you get the same result.
That's what the last It is absolutely pathetic. And therefore, Gerry, I'm not going to be kind now. I can't be kind to SNP supporters and say, you didn't know, you didn't ken, you didn't understand. You do know, you do ken, you do understand. And if you give both votes to the SNP, what you are doing is you are voting for unionism. That's what you're doing. It's just plain and simple.
Do you think the SNP's any intention of delivering independence anymore, or are they just too comfortable managing devolution? Because there's a lot of salaries involved in this, Tommy. There's a whole ecosystem. Gerry and I have explored this on numerous occasions. Office staff and office staff, everybody's on a cushy wage, a cushy number, then get elected to council, all this kind of stuff. What would be the motivation? Because it seems to me there's a complete lack of motivation in SNP now to deliver on this.
Do you know what, Greg? I always try and differentiate between what I call the nomenclature, the leadership of the SNP. Those who have got a vested interest, those that are part of the bureaucracy, and the general SNP, the support basis for the SNP. I think don't get me wrong, I think they've lost thousands and thousands and thousands of members, many of whom joined in 15 on the wave of enthusiasm of the referendum. I think the overwhelming majority of SNP supporters still believe in independence. But I'm afraid there's a lot of leadership characters who I think we're more interested in their careers. I remember, to sum it up, Greg, I remember in 15, as I say, it was uncharacteristic for me to be going to campaign meetings and calling for people to vote SNP. And I used to always use a phrase. I says, look, send them down there to settle up, not to settle down. Right? And that sort of assuaged my doubts, and it made me feel better that I was sending out a message to people. They're not going down there to be comfortable, be part of the club. They're going down there to settle up, not settle down. I'm sorry, mate. I'm sorry, Greg, because now all I see is MPs that are doing nothing other than settling down, getting their feet under the table, taking wages which are absolutely outrageous. Politicians are way overpaid for what they do. It's a disgraceful situation. I mean, it's worse in Westminster than it is in the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Parliament, 74.5 grand. 74.5 grand. Now, by the way, senior social workers taking decisions day in, day out on children's lives, on where elderly people going to homes or no. Senior doctors, firefighters, who are people's lives in their hands. They're getting paid about £55,000 a year, and we've got MSPs on 74.5, and down in Parliament they're on 90. I mean, honestly, it beggars belief. I would change all that overnight, Greg. I would introduce an average wage of a skilled worker. That if a senior social worker, if a firefighter, if a train driver can live in 55 grand a year, why can a bloody politician not live in that? For God's sake, most people would either earn for that level of salary.
Listen, I don't disagree with that. I think that the majority of these MPs and MSPs, the reliance on their office staff in particular, because ultimately you've got to remember, you're elected as a legislator at that level, and when you're getting casework and you're getting local work and various other things all coming through the door, when it boils down to it, if you're taking the party whip, what are you actually doing? Because there's not really much that's been performed in relation to justifying even an existence of that salary. So I find it absolutely bizarre. I want to move on, but at this stage, if that's all right, because obviously you're heavily involved with Alba. Alba is presenting a number of list candidates this time around. And we're seeing a rise of it right now, Tommy. I don't need to talk much about it. Everybody in the country is fully aware what direction the UK government is potentially going to take. Do we need more unapologetic politics? Do we need to go back to a day, practically go back to like the 80s and the 90s, where we have strong language, strong rhetoric, and calling a spade? Because really, in effect, what we're seeing coming for the right is just an absolute mishmash of nonsense that's getting presented to everybody to take it. Whereas there seems to be, there's nobody articulate enough to actually just stand up to this.
Sorry, Greg, I don't even think it's necessarily just being ability to articulate. I think it's the ability to stand up to them and have the balls and the courage to call it out. I mean, Reform's a racist party. It's absolute and utter racism to try and blame asylum seekers, immigrants, to try and differentiate between. I mean, I hate this absolute ignorance between a legal asylum seeker and an illegal asylum seeker. Every single person has a right to claim asylum. Nobody's illegal, and we should call that out. It's racism. It's racism. Clear as the nose in my face, it's racism. And what it is the desire for a lot of people who are maybe down in the dumps, maybe things haven't went well in their lives, and they want to be better than somebody. They want to punch down instead of looking up. And we should not give an inch. The idea that we somehow or other compromise with these people is just utter nonsense. As I say over and over in big platforms, instead of having a go at the small boats, why are we not having a go at the super yachts? The super yachts are bringing in the billionaires that are actually taking away jobs and taking away money for taxation because they're all tax dodgers. Why are we not going to go at them? My mom used to always say to me, she says, listen, son, sectarianism, the bosses love it because if the Catholics are fighting the Protestants, then they're no fighting the bosses. And it's the same the day with immigrants and asylum seekers. If we're fighting immigrants and asylum seekers, we're no fighting the bosses. And I hate it. I absolutely hate it. Do you think this? I don't see. Sorry, mate. I don't. When I look at an asylum seeker or an immigrant, I don't see a colour of skin. I don't see a creed. I don't see a religion. I see a human being. And I would like to think that if I was ever in a position where I was seeking refuge in another country, that I wouldn't be treated with the catcalls and the abuse and the swearing and the hatred that I see getting spewed daily by. And by the way, let's be clear about this. These people aren't new. It's just that they've got a new force. Most of them are Tories. Most of them are unionists. What I can't stand, Greg, and I'm going to just very, very quick. Sorry to hold this.
No, listen, on you go.
I can't stand when I ever see. I mean, there's a couple of demos where I've seen some Celtic wearing strips and with people in with these racists, and I say to myself, "You're an ignorant bastard. You're an ignorant bastard because." You support a club that was built by fucking immigrants. Do you know that? Do you know your own history? And yet you're standing there with a hate-filled audience and they all say, oh, I'm not a racist. But the person next to them's doing a Z-Kyle sign or the person next to them's got a sign saying, kill them all. I'm not racist. Well, if you're not racist, what are you doing standing with them? Sorry.
No, listen, on you again. Look, listen. This is perfectly legitimate. This is the kind of language I'm talking about. Do you think that Swinney can translate something like that for normal people to understand? Statistically speaking, they're all right. Keir Starmer's right to a certain degree. Swinney's right to a certain degree. None of them are able to translate this message, and that seems to be where we're going. Your entire piece there in relation to what your views and values are on the subject matter, I think that's missing in discourse. It's completely missing because we've not got any politicians that are brave enough to actually turn around and say this is a spade.
Well, there's no doubt that would cause a lot of ire. It would get a lot of kickback. I mean, you would get the stinking rotten gutter press having a go at you. They would try and they would then get they would roll out somebody and say, oh, this poor person they've only got legitimate concerns and you're calling them a racist. And quite frankly, Greg, I think we've got to be, because if you hold those views, effectively what you're saying is that we don't respect human rights, because it is a fact. In human right, every single human being has the legal right to seek asylum in any country. See all this pish about, oh, why are they coming here? Why don't they go to another country? It doesn't matter. They're coming here because they've got a right, a legal right people fought for. after the Second World War and fascism. They fought for that. And yet these people are going on and on. And I've got to laugh. They talk about Britain returning Britain to being British and all the rest of it. Most of them are funded by the Israelis, for God's sake, and the Americans. So I don't know what they're talking about Britain, because they're in the hands of them, you know.
Aye.
Tommy, I think you've made your points rather clearly there. And,
eloquently.
Very
I need to
eloquently.
get the beeper out, but I need to get the beeper out for the radio show.
As always, we're talking about people being able to articulate a political message. We keep a close eye on the ballot box Scotland in particular, just to see how things are moving as we move into 2026 for the Holyrood election, and then 2027 for council elections, which Greg and I are likely to be involved in. Things have moved quite a bit, even from February of this year to now. When we looked at the ballot box Scotland information in February, it looked as if Alba were likely to have maybe between 4 and 6 regional list seats. And on the 25th of September, the latest projections have come out, and Alba have moved off that entirely. Now, a few things have happened within the party. Obviously, losing Alex Salmond was an incredibly big blow. And I guess the question is, can it recover? Can it recover losing someone with that political clout, with a political sense of articulation? He never missed a spot when he spoke. If he wanted to hit a political point, he hit it, and he hit it hard, and everybody understood what that meant, and it resonated through a country in 2007, enough for them to win that election for the first time. Yep. Is Alba at a real disadvantage now because the likes of him are not there, and who's the only person that within the party who's likely to speak that kind of language?
Gerry, how could you lose an individual with the integrity, with the ability, with the skill, with the experience of somebody like Alex Salmond, and not be a disadvantage? I mean, of course it is a disadvantage. It's quite clearly a disadvantage. It's very, very quickly. It's important that I lay out the context and the background to my involvement with Alba, because I was involved with a group of independent supporters across Scotland who were very aware as we approached the 2021 Scottish Parliament election that the idea of SNP 1 and 2 was a disaster, and we had to do something about it. We had to try and convince the independents voting community not to give their list votes to the SNP. So we, people like Dave Thompson away up in Inverness, who was a former MSP, myself and others who had been in the Parliament, we established a group called Action for Independence, AFI, AFI. And we were clear that we were going to fight the 2021 Scottish Parliament election on a single platform, a single issue: independence. So, because we had disagreements on certain things, European Union and everything else, but it all pales into insignificance, because independence, without it, all the other things are meaningless, because you can't do anything. So we set up and we had elected lists in all of the regions in Scotland, all of the 8 regions in Scotland. We selected, I was selected to stand top of the list in Glasgow. The boy Dave Thompson was top of the list in Highlands and Islands. Craig Murray, who's a big independence campaigner, was elected to stand top of the list in Lothians. So we had a good list of candidates. However, in round about mid-March of 2021, the announcement was made that a new party was getting formed, and that Alec was leading this new party, and it was going to be called Alba. Right? We weren't involved with that. We weren't aware of it. It was quite secretive the way it was done, and we had a decision to make then, Gerry, because we're already selected. We're getting ready to stand, but the reason we were standing was to stop division with a list vote. and trying to maximise support for independence. So it took a lot of soul searching, and it was a difficult decision, difficult discussions, because a lot of time and effort had went into it. But we decided to withdraw, just to completely withdraw and support Alba. We saw Alba as a better bet than Afi at that time, particularly with Alec. I've got to say, if I've my hand on my heart, I've got to say that we probably underestimated, Gerry, the damage that the Niagara Falls of slurs that were festooned on Alec had on his reputation and his standing, because the vote that Alba got in 2021 was not good. It was not good at all. And I think a lot of that was to do with the fact that the media had been wall to wall. I mean, you would have thought Alec had actually lost his case with the coverage that he got. It was pathetic. He actually won his case, but you wouldn't have known that. So I joined Alba way back in 2021, because some people say to me, "Oh, that's good to see you've now joined Alba," as if it's recent. I was a founding member of Alba way back in 2021. Over the years, I was active in Glasgow. Then my mum took me well. I was my mum's carer. Then I took up a degree, did a social work degree for 2 years. So I wasn't as active as I could have been. However, more recently this year, I've been elected on the National Executive Committee. I went through the vetting process, and I'm now on the approved list of candidates for Alba. And it remains to be seen whether I'll be selected to stand in Glasgow or not. That'll be up to the Glasgow members. So that's a sort of a context in the background. What I would say to you is we've done our own polling, and our own polling indicates that we are still within touching distance. We are between 4% and 6%. The most recent poll that we get done privately, we had to pay for it ourselves, obviously, but it shows that there is a chance of at least 4 being elected. I think things will become clearer, if I'm honest, Gerry, when it comes near to the election. See right now, I mean, if you were to get somebody to phone you up, maybe you, because of your political background and your understanding, if somebody mentions Alba on the phone to you, you'll maybe recognise it. Would you be willing to give them your second vote? And you might say aye, right? I think most people who are getting asked these polling questions right now, they probably don't even know about Alba. They don't know its existence. But when it comes to an election and choices are in front of you, I think it becomes more acute. And I do think, I mean, think about it, mate. It's not as if this is climbing Mount Everest. It's not Mount Everest. Don't get me wrong, it might still be a wee mountain, but it's no Mount Everest. Because the idea that out of every single person that votes SNP next year, that we get six out of every 100 decide to give their list vote to Alba, that is not insurmountable.
That's reasonable, aye.
Tommy, I know Greg wants to come in, but just on that, on the Alba issue, now, while not in the same league as Alex Salmond, there's a resignation of Ash Regan recently from the party, so close to an election. And the fact that she's going to stand as an independent, does that say something to the electorate that Ash Regan herself, the only Alba MSP, believes that she's a better chance of being re-elected as an independent than she would from Alba? And how is that? How does that? What does that feel like within the party?
Well, on the National Executive, Gerry, it has been clear over the last 6 months that since the election of Kenny McCaskill as the leader of Alba, Ash stood against Kenny and lost, and then she disengaged. She's not been active at all within Alba. So the decision that was taken last weekend was a decision that we've been expecting for the last 6 months. So there's absolutely no surprise whatsoever. And in terms of Alba activities, Ash hasn't been involved in them. So there's no loss to Alba in terms of, she was doing this, she was doing that. She wasn't doing any of that for Alba. And the fact that she's going to stand as an independent has got no impact on Alba at all, because she's going to stand as an independent in a constituency. So Alba's not going to stand in a constituency. So our position is that by and large in every constituency, if you want to maximise independence, vote regardless. And by the way, Gerry, nobody needs to convince me about all the reasons why not to vote SNP. I know them. I know them. But what am I going to do when it comes to the election? I'm going to hold my nose and I'm going to vote SNP in the constituency. Why? Because I can't vote unionism. I simply cannot vote for a unionist party. Now, there's talk about Fergus Ewan, for instance, standing as an independent. Now, if I lived in Fergus Ewan's constituency, who would I vote? I'd vote Fergus Ewan. If there are viable, and when I say viable, I mean potential winning candidates going to stand in a constituency that isn't going to hold a seat to a unionist, would I vote for them instead of SNP? I'd have to consider it. I'd have to consider it seriously. But by and large, across the 72, or is it 73, I can't remember, it seems to change recently, or the constituencies, by and large, I would be calling for independent supporters to give their constituency vote to the SNP. If you want to give your list vote to the SNP, then you'd be as well as calling yourself a unionist. Just put your hand up and say, I'm a unionist, because that's what I'm doing. I'm voting for unionism with my list vote. Don't necessarily, if you're not going to vote Alba, some people don't like Alba, they didn't like Alec, they might not like Kenny McCaskill, might not like me, fair dues, but don't give your second vote, don't give your list vote.
It's a strong message.
Yeah. Do you think obviously, again, Tommy, you've got the rise of Jeremy Corbyn's party, your party now, coming into the fray for Scottish politics. Do you think that that's potentially going to take away any sort of vote that Alba could have potentially had? Because Corbyn's publicly came out and says that basically it's up for the Scottish people to decide the future and the constitutional right of the Scottish people. Now, right now, as you would see, there's probably about, I think it's 100,000 people that have signed up membership within Scotland alone. And if it's the case that that's the kind of numbers that they're dealing with, will that translate into the Scottish Parliament elections if they decide to stand candidates? Well, where will it leave Alba?
Two important factors to bear in mind, Greg. Two very important factors which makes me conclude that your party isn't going to impact adversely on Alba. Number one, Jeremy doesn't believe in Scottish independence. I know Jeremy, I've known him for many, many years. I admire him greatly. I was involved way back in the anti-poll tax campaign, way back in the 80s. He was in the campaign group of MPs. I got to know him in Westminster at the time. I've known him for decades, and he is a man of integrity. He's someone who in 2015 at the general election, 2017 at the general election, and then 2019, I was calling for people in England to vote Labour. I mean, because Jeremy was the leader. So I respect the guy, but he's not for independence. He doesn't believe in Scottish independence, and the your party isn't going to campaign for independence. So if you're an independent supporter, you're voting for a unionist party. You're voting for a party that believes in a socialist Britain. It doesn't believe in a socialist Scotland. So I don't think that will take away a significant number, if any, of Alba votes. I've got to say a second thing, Greg, and it's a divisive issue, but it's an issue nonetheless that has to get brought up. And that is that Alba believes that a woman is a woman. Alba believes that you don't certificate somebody who's a man and recognise them as a woman. It just doesn't happen. We believe in biology. We believe in science. I'm afraid Jeremy's party doesn't. But Jeremy's party doesn't. Jeremy's party is part of that gender self-identity cult, which I consider to be madness. I think it's madness. I think the idea that you call somebody a bigot because they believe that a man cannot become a woman is just anti-science. It is anti-reality. And that's what the Greens, unfortunately, SNP, and your party, that's what they all endorse. Alba believes quite fundamentally that women's rights are primary. They are much more important than men's feelings. We keep getting told that you're going to hurt men's feelings if you say to them that even though they identify as a woman, you don't recognise them as a woman. I'm sorry, your feelings don't matter to me compared to women's rights. I'm not going to be cruel to you. I'm not going to discriminate against you. You're a human being, and I'll treat you as a human being. But please don't ask me to buy into your fantasy, because you are not a woman. You are a man.
Listen. Again, I think these points are important, but I'm going to come back to your party again, Tommy, because right now it seems to me within the sort of independence debate there seems to be a sort of stalemate. The SNP is very comfortable in position of managing devolution, in my opinion. That's where the SNP now sit. Being the product or being the delivery mechanism for an independent Scotland, I don't really think it sits with them anymore. The movement was always bigger than the SNP. It's just the SNP has managed to control it and manage it more appropriately than what other political parties such as Alba and others that may come after that are going to try and do. If it's a case that your party does become a relevance within the political scene in Scotland, is there any chance that you think that potentially within the list positions, if it was a case of Alba and your party and perhaps one or two others, then you do have that overwhelming majority within Scotland for that plebiscite election that Alba continues to promote? How would you take that forward then, if that's the case, that you ended up with that majority of independent supporting parties there? And I appreciate what you're saying about Jeremy Corbyn, and I appreciate exactly that independence might not be behind his agenda, but for his members campaigning locally, it'll be a decision for the Scottish people. So perhaps there's a wee elbow nudge in there if it's a case that they get people returned. How does that look then? What's day one? That new Holyrood or new Holyrood cycle? Where do you take that next? How's the plebiscite election play out thereafter?
Greg, we need to be very, very honest with people. We can't have a plebiscite election if we're not clear and we're not explicit. And the explicit part of it has to be that the vote that you've cast is for an explicitly independent supporting party. See, anybody that votes for your party, you can't count that votes, because it doesn't matter whether there's individual candidates might back it. The truth is, your party's a British party, and they don't support Scottish independence. They support a lot of good things. I'm a big socialist myself, and I support the socialist policies, but they will not be the only kids on the block. I've seen the internal documents. I've witnessed a lot of the meetings that have taken place. There is a major debate now within the your party in Scotland to see whether they are going to stand in next May, precisely because there's disagreements on the left about making the independence statement explicit. And what the your party people are saying is, no, we shouldn't fight for independence. We shouldn't make that explicit. So if you don't make it explicit, you can't count those votes as independence votes. You can count them as socialist votes. You couldn't count them as independence votes. So I think, if I'm absolutely honest, the people who should be worried about your party standing is the Labour Party and the Greens. I think they'll lose votes to your party. But I don't think Alba will lose votes, because I think anybody that's an independent supporter is looking for an explicitly independence party.
I'm coming at it for the perspective, Tommy, that perhaps that could break the deadlock, because obviously where we are in Scottish politics at the moment, as I say, the SNP's basically the gatekeeper in relation to the independence aspects of things. And what does that look like? Even if it was a case, hypothetically, let's say your party comes out tomorrow and say, right, that's us, we're nationalists now, we're going to support that idea of a referendum in Scotland for the Scottish people to decide. What does it look like the day after? Because I do have a funny feeling that we're going to have a majority and independent supporting political groupings within the Holyrood election. And how does that then be achieved? How does that then be achieved? Because if we take on the Supreme Court's rulings and everything else, and the SNP is quite happy to hide behind these things. If it's a case that we do end up in a position that Holyrood can make that decision, that determination, what does it look like?
Well, quite clearly what the Supreme Court ruled, Greg, was that the Holyrood Parliament doesn't have the inherent power to call an independence referendum. But they then went on to clarify, and they then went on to explain, however, you still have the power of elections, which is why the plebiscite election is so important here. So from my point of view, imagine I was elected to the Scottish Parliament and 51% of the votes cast in the list were for independent supporting parties. My position in that Parliament would be that we immediately convene a conference of all the independent supporting groups and Civic Scotland, the trade unions. We decide our programme, we decide what we're looking for, and we send it to Westminster and we give them 12 months. We give them 12 months. This is our withdrawal agreement. Here's the terms of our withdrawal. Now, they will probably prevaricate, they'll ignore us, they'll do everything they can, they'll try and rubbish us. We then build in that 12 months. We build towards the period where we give them that final date, and if they haven't come back and given us an answer, that's it. We declare our independence. That's what most countries in the world have done in order to get the freedom from the colonial yoke of British imperialism. So it's not as if it's something strange. It's not as if it's something unique. It's something that many other countries have done. But that, I think, that 12-month period, we could bring people together. We could clarify what we're talking about in terms of pensions. People keep saying, we need to keep our pensions. And I say, no, that's not what independence is about. It's not about keeping our pensions. We've got the worst pensions in Europe. Let's have an independent Scotland where we actually go for the average pension in Europe, which is a significantly higher pension. Let's look at our clean technology to produce energy. We are now producing more energy than we need. We're now shipping it to England. They're building infrastructure to take even more of it. Why do we allow that to be in private hands? That should be in public hands. And then we could generate the resources we could regenerate from our clean energy production. We're talking about free energy for people. We're talking about saying to people in Scotland, by the way, see the energy bills you're worried about, you're not going to have to worry about them because we're going to give you free energy. That's the potential we've got in an independent Scotland. Talk about lighting up people's enthusiasm.
Just before we finish, because this has been the quickest.
Tommy. This
has been the quickest hour we've had, right? But I want to ask you this, right? The reality for those who are not doing particularly well, right? For those who aren't billionaires or those the jet setters with the big yachts and all the rest of it, which is mostly is all we need to do is look at our bank balance and we can tell, right? But salaries now are less in real terms than they were in 2008 before the crash. They're not likely to even reach parity until about 2035. Child poverty in Scotland is less than it is in elsewhere in the UK, but it's still higher than it should be. We still have the rape clause in place. Energy prices are close to £500 higher than they promised, than Labour promised they would be when Keir was campaigning to become the Prime Minister. Grangemouth is shutting. We're in the middle of a housing crisis. How do you convince voters then that independence, the badge independence, is more important than those very basic elements of life that I've just rhymed off?
I think the way we do it, Gerry, is that we explain patiently that tackling child poverty, tackling low pay, tackling the housing crisis is all hot air without the economic levers and economic powers to actually invest, to actually decide that we're going to have a national housing agency, to actually decide that we're going to borrow money and we're going to create an economy where people get wages that mean they don't rely on benefits. The biggest single growth area in benefits nowadays, Gerry, is this term which absolutely pisses me off as an oxymoron, the working poor. Well, see, if you're working, why are you poor? We're subsidising Asda, we're subsidising Tesco because we're giving benefits, we're giving working families tax credits to workers who are working for organisations who are making billions of pounds in profits but only paying their workers a decent wage. We've got to have legislation in place that imposes on these companies that they cannot get away any longer with riding on the back of the public sector. Now, in order to do any of that, you need independence. So if I come to a meeting and I say child poverty is a priority, tackling child poverty, pensioner poverty is a priority, we need to tackle pensioner poverty, it is like a hairdryer. It's like turning on a hairdryer without independence, because without independence We can't do anything. All we can do is appeal to Keir, appeal to Sir Keir. Aye, right. Where's that going to get you? Absolutely nowhere. So for me, Gerry, every single road. I mean, John McLean, the great socialist from the Clydeside era in Glasgow, is my icon, my political inspiration. John McLean recognised way back in the 1918, 1919, 1920 period that Scotland was ripe for independence, that we should be a democratic, modern republic, that we should use the wealth, the land, the resources that we have in order for the benefit of the people. We are one of the potentially richest nations in the whole planet. But without independence, it's only going to go to London or it's going to go to offshore accounts. So to me, Gerry, everything's about independence.
And on that bombshell, Tommy Sheridan, thank you very much for joining us. And what's the point? It's been an absolute pleasure, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tommy.
Thanks, guys.
So there we have it then, Gerry, with Tommy Sheridan on the night show, full of revelations and bombshells.
Pulling no punches, Greg.
No punches whatsoever. There's the kind of political discussion and debate that we love on this What's the Point show. But one of the points that stood out for me, Gerry, was his point in relation to an MSP salary. He would bring the average wage of a skilled worker to an MSP. How many pairs of pants did you think just dropped across North Lanarkshire, especially with the politicians? How many? Bottling it.
All of them?
All of them. I agree, Gerry. I think that is definitely something that would be absolutely quaking in their boots. But anyway, we're going to kind of jump to a couple of wee songs now. If you give us a couple of minutes, we'll be back. And when we come back, we had a couple of phone calls come in during that Tommy interview.
We did, there. Greg, we did.
And basically, we didn't get the opportunity to answer them. So if you phoned in, feel free to phone in. But I wanted to talk about, when we come back, Gerry, I want to talk about Frank McNally MP, because our Frank has launched a wee campaign in relation to your neck of the woods down at Bellshill in regards to the RBS closure.
And I want
to talk about that.
Bank of Scotland, yeah, absolutely.
So we'll be back after a couple of tunes and then we'll be right back into debate. If you phoned in, try again, alright? Hello and welcome back to What's the Point? I'm joined by my old pal and partner in crime, Gerry Brennan. How are you, Gerry?
Greg, I'm freezing.
I know, it's very cold.
We're in here, and for the very first time, this place is not like a sauna.
No.
It's always roasting.
Even in the middle of summer, it was like a sauna.
So the heating's not working tonight, but we're going to warm it up with some good political chat.
So, Gerry, I wanted to come on, as I said before the break. I need to put a disclaimer there now as well. Apologies for the Tommy interview. We did try to get the beep button working, but obviously we recognise there was a couple of expletives in there that we didn't manage to get to in time, so our deepest apologies for that. But what I would say is, before the break, we wanted to have that discussion on Frank McNally being the saviour at Bellshill and making sure that the local bank doesn't shut down now. This is in the back, by the way, Frank McNally's Go Radio interview earlier in the week with Bernard Ponsonby.
Saw that.
Is that not now, not ever, there is nothing that the Scots can do in terms of their voting preference, because you effectively have a Westminster veto and that's it.
We made clear going into the general election last year that there would not be a second independence referendum. That was overwhelmingly supported.
So there can't ever be a second referendum.
There is not going to be a second.
There can't ever be a second referendum.
There is not going to be a second independence referendum. We are talking about the priorities going into next year's Scottish Parliament election. That is going to be on addressing the issues that are important to the people of Scotland.
Ooh, you're hard showing off.
To the bat for right.
Big Frank's portfolio seems to have risen exponentially.
Well, he's doing, is he not carrying Douglas Alexander's peace box?
Personal secretary,
He's
I think the official
secretary.
title is.
Absolutely.
But what made me laugh was Frank with a straight face saying,
telling the nation
there will not be another independence referendum. And I thought to myself, my goodness, that's somebody's ego has risen exponentially at the fact that he thinks he's a public spokesman of the Labour Party now.
Well, do you know, it's funny you say that. So he could speak authoritatively.
Well, it was very authoritative
in relation to the nation,
yes,
not having the right to have a second referendum if they so wished.
But the people of Scotland don't get the right to decide because Frank
McNally has made it perfectly clear that the nation is not getting a second referendum. So Frank has spoken.
Aye.
And probably, I was surprised that he couldn't speak quite as authoritatively in relation to the closure of the last remaining bank in the big town of Bellshill. Bellshill was a big constituency. His constituency. Yeah. And last week I saw on social media a picture outside the bank soon to close, where Frank is there and he's adorned around him with all the other elected members, all the councillors.
Post that image on the podcast.
And a former councillor, Harry Curran.
Big Harry was in the picture, wasn't he?
Big Harry is in the picture, which suggests
drawn out of retirement, Gerry.
I think Harry is going to be wheeled out in 2027 as one of the councillors for the Bellshill area. Yes, I do indeed. Harry's he looks younger than he does. By the way, I like Harry Curran. Harry's a good guy, and but I wouldn't be at all surprised if Harry is back.
Who was the big guy standing at the back, Gerry? Who was he? A big guy dressed in black?
Do you know, I've no idea. I thought it was the big guy out of the Munsters.
Is that the elusive MSP?
Well,
Grifter. I was ready to say Grifter. Mark Griffin.
Someone pointed out that is the elusive Mark Griffin. Now you made it
available on a hunter's moon.
So he's been putting up everywhere. This guy that nobody's ever seen.
There's an election coming up.
I know,
and an election.
And there's been some brilliant videos that they've created where they're all walking round about the back end of View Park as you're heading on into Glasgow, waving their hands like this.
This is the Glasgow roads.
The Glasgow.
Why are they on a car?
I don't know, but there's something wrong with their hands.
On a car. Every one of them wanted a Jeremy Clarkson Top Gear driving away.
It was like us, you're outraged by this proposed tax on North Lanarkshire drivers. Please get in touch, leave a comment below or sign our petition.
It was murder. It was murder. Anyway, whoever's doing the videos, stop.
I hope nobody in North Lanarkshire Council's in charge of these comms videos for the Labour Party. That's all I can say.
But going back to the point, I'm looking at the picture in the post, and it's about how angry Frank McNally MP is about the decision to close the last remaining bank, and he signed the petition. He's saying sign the petition, and you look at the petition, it's not even his petition, it's a petition that's been put up by a local solicitor in the town, so it's not Frank's. So
he's claiming the glory in this then. They're trying to be fair, but it's his petition.
You could say that, but what struck me was the duplicitous nature of that picture, as if there's nothing that can be done, as if all that we can do as a community in Bellshill is sign this petition. That's all we can do. Frank knows well and good that banking and financial services is a reserved matter to the Westminster Parliament, and the minister in charge of that is a Labour minister. And the Labour minister in charge of that is Rachel Reeves, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer.
So Frank theoretically then could just pick the phone up to his colleague,
absolutely,
and say, listen, I want to make sure that this bank doesn't shut what you're proposing, and how do we do it?
Bellshill has around 25,000 inhabitants, right? a big town. At one time in that town, coming down from Moss End, you had the Clydesdale Bank, you had the Royal Bank, you had the Airdrie Savings Bank, Bank of Scotland, you had the Leeds, pretty sure you had the Dunfermline Building Society as well at one point. And now, by next May, they'll all be gone.
Yeah.
Now, these banks, people need to remember this. In 2008, when the banking system almost collapsed, it was the general public who bailed these banks out. It was our tax pounds and pences that saved these banks. And what do those communities get now as a reward for that loyalty, for refloating them effectively and enduring since 2008, as we spoke to Tommy Sheridan about, since that crash in 2008, we bailed out all the bankers. They kept their big fat salaries. Our salaries will not even reach parity of 2008 in terms of cash value into the 2030s. And the reward for that is closure. Absolute closure.
Do you know what struck me for that interview, if I'm being honest? Because I've never thought it like this before, was the point that he made in relation to tax credits. And if you're in work and you're receiving tax credits, is that a subsidy of the big corporations? Because ultimately, we as taxpayers are paying to subsidise these companies. I've never ever thought it like that before.
It's effectively what the government is saying. And this came in under the Tony Blair's
government,
Labour government tax credits. What Tony Blair's government and Gordon Brown's government are saying is corporations don't need to pay wages at the market rate. We'll top it up for you, so you'll have more profit and you can pay less, and we'll top it up.
What I found interesting out of that photograph, because Progressive Change's Facebook page was quick to adopt that photograph to make a comedic meme out of it. Because it was perfectly right for it to be perfectly frank. There was 8 politicians standing in that photo. And it's all 8 Labour politicians standing with the glum faces and let's make sure that...
And only Labour can fix the problem.
Listen, I think that's not in dispute, but the point being is again, one of the things that struck me there, Gerry, right, and again coming on the back of it, Tommy Sheridan had said, was the idea of this average wage for a skilled worker for an MSP. But if you really think about it, we Franks own about 90 grand a year plus expenses, so you still get his expenses added on. Then Mark Griffin, who is a list MSP, so he doesn't even carry really much work in regards to other constituency MSPs. It's always lesser.
That's a fact.
If you're a list MSP, and again, he'll be on £70,000, and then you start to get to the councillors, every one of them on 26,000. So out of that 8, there was like over 200-300 grand. They had their office staff and their expenses and everything. It's like £700,000 just in 140.
No, I mean it's big money. And then you look at the bank, or the owner of that bank. The owner of the Bank of Scotland in Bellshill is Lloyds Group. Lloyds Group posted a pre-tax profit last year of £6 billion.
Aye.
£6,000 million, and that's not enough. We need to make savings. Worse than that, the year before it, they made 20% more than that. So over the years, it's these organisations aren't just making millions.
No,
it's billions, it's trillions over a period of time. And they want to make more by closing banks down.
So a point that's just been emailed into me there, Gerry, it's no tax credits, it's universal credits, which I think that I need to correct, because I say tax credits.
Well, there used to be working tax credits, correct?
That's what I was going to say. Point I would make is again, but as the Labour government, if we continue to use this, why are we not taking a more stronger stance? Why is Labour, and again, I think I'm leading myself into a sort of
a cul-de-sac here in relation to this question, because there's no out on it. But again, Labour, if you look at Labour, I'm going to use Frank as an example in this. Having listened to that Go Radio interview with Frank, which I thought was absolutely, honestly,
hysterical.
Oh, it was the most bizarre thing I think I've ever watched in my life. It was so opinionated. Now, having known him for a number of years, I've been a councillor in North Lanarkshire before he was elected.
Shut up,
Position, yeah, an MP. Frank always did what he was told. So again, for a convenership position, and you're talking about Kilbowie, you're talking about school transport, you're talking about all these different other things. Melm was another one. Frank was dead quick to try and shut down any discussion, any debate, and that was because it was under instruction of the council leader. Now it seems to be he's got higher paymasters, which is obviously Dougie, and Dougie's telling him you'll not be holding a referendum.
You'll be holding my peace boats.
You'll be holding my peace boats. So where is this bravery came? That's what I don't understand. It seems to be he's emboldened. I've had a harder snorter in my opinion, but as I said again, it seems to be emboldened that he's going to be the one to tell the Scottish people that you'll not decide.
There's some bigger issues. I mean, that watching that, knowing Frank and watching that Go Radio podcast was funny, right? It's funny, and then you look back at all of the decisions that were made to cut the clangers off council services. Club 365 was probably the best of the worst, right? Because that was heralded by Frank in particular about a game changer. It's a game changer. Kids are going to be fed all the way through the year, not just at school but through the holidays and all the rest of it, and then they closed it. And even when they could have kept it open, there was 18 services delivering that, and they had the money to deliver to all 18, and they shut 6 of them even when that money was there. It was a disgusting, disgraceful behaviour, and I never saw him at that point heralding the changes, because what was a game changer just became a headache. So he didn't really want to talk about that.
People's champion before, but now all of a sudden, because there's potentially a bank closing in Bellshill, he's out there, and they're all sombre faced, and they're all going to stand up for this, but really in effect we're going to be disingenuous and not tell you I could pick up the phone to the Chancellor.
I went into that bank not that long ago to lift some money out because my son had passed his test, right? I was taking money out because he was buying a car, and I was giving him some money. I don't know the last time you went into a bank, Greg. I go into the bank every now and again if I need to, but when you go into the bank, you find out that mostly the people who are in there are people who don't have very much and who are having financial problems, right? They need somebody to speak to, or it's an older person getting into the bank potentially to lift money out. Now, I sat in the queue because there was only one teller in there one day, and there was an older gentleman in trying to lift money out, and it took about 25 minutes for that man to get his money out of the bank, because the girl who was working that day was doing all the due diligence to make sure that man wasn't being ripped off, he wasn't being scammed. And this is the point that I would want to make about the importance of high street banking and face-to-face contact, particularly for people who are vulnerable. That old man, when he was in there, ended up lifting money out. It was a genuine case. He wanted to lift the money out, but the whole issue around scamming for older people is a real issue. Older people are scammed much more because they're older, they're vulnerable, and the loss of that on the high street is going to be really detrimental. So those who are vulnerable, older people in particular, will not have that safeguard anymore. And banks don't need to. No, what do they do? What are they going to do if you do it online? It's a faceless transaction. You do it through your own account. You may get a phone call, but you probably won't get a phone call.
Well, if it's up to Labour, we'll all have brick cards shortly, and everything will all be linked to bank accounts and everything else.
I don't want Frank McNally knocking at my door, making sure that I've got my brick card.
That's what I was going to say. He'll be the first one to sport it, Gerry, because his masters have told him so. But listen, as much as I would love to spend all night talking about the enigma that is Frank,
just tell Mr McNally to get down to Rachel Reeves's front door at number 11 Downing Street, knock her up and tell her to keep that bank open. The end.
Here's a couple of quick questions that have came in tonight, Gerry. Why are we still being told to both votes SNP when it's clear it's never delivered independence?
So it's only delivered in 2011, actually, when the expectation was that the SNP might not do as well as they eventually did.
Yeah.
And people, I think, were probably a bit more generous towards the SNP at that point, especially Labour voters. So they would vote Labour 1 and perhaps SNP 2. And that meant that on the second vote, SNP ended up with quite a lot of list votes in 2011. Now, by the time they hit 2016, most of the unionists had fallen out of love with the SNP because of the referendum.
Yeah.
So SNP stating that the only way for an SNP majority is to vote 1 and 2, and they did the same again in 2021, SNP 1 and 2, and they ended up with 1 list seat. So this time around, I don't know, it may be different this time around. Maybe the SNP are going to need.
Right, listen, again, I can't see them taking up any regional list positions. I think they'll struggle with constituency seats as well, although it's a perfect storm for the SNP. And for me, being a perfect storm means that the political opposition that currently exists in Scotland, who can you potentially vote for? The Tories? Well, they're dead and buried. Labour? Well, there, if you look at the polls, are going to be absolutely annihilated come the Scottish Parliament election. So really, in effect, you're looking at other alternate parties, potentially the Greens, potentially the Lib Dems, potentially Alba, your party, as we discussed with Tommy. Again, there's these other parties that are coming through the middle, in my opinion, that could potentially give the SNP the opportunity for that. But I come back to that point, are they happy to manage devolution? Because that's what it seems to be. Everybody's on really good salaries. Why upset the apple cart?
Do you want one of the projections that's been given? This is from AMS Ideal Projections, right? There's 129 seats in the Parliament. And the projections are this: the SNP would have 43, the Tories would have 14, Labour would have 25, the Greens would have 11, the Lib Dems 13, and Reform UK 23. And that would mean that between the only openly pro-independence parties gaining any seats on this projection is that they would only have 54 between them, the SNP and the Greens. So that's one of the less favourable projections, I have to say. But a possible outcome: 43 for the SNP, 11 for the Greens, and the rest going to the unionist parties.
Well, on that bombshell, Gerry, I think that's us came to the end of the show.
I think so.
One more one which kind of made me laugh there. So Frank McNally says there's no indy-left coming. Is that official Labour policy now, or did he just get tired of pretending Scotland gets a say?
I don't know.
I think that's an interesting question, but that's no for the night. We'll answer that.
That's no for the night.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back again next week, and next week we have a star of stage and screen for the big screens to sunny shots. Now we're going to be introducing Tam Dean Burns, and again, when Tam comes on, we'll get the opportunity to discuss about the rise of your party.
Absolutely.
And where that seems to be heading. And it'll be an interesting debate, especially for the left's perspective. I think that'll be good.
Well, I did just want to say thanks again to Tommy Sheridan, a brilliant guest, kept us entertained for a very, very quick hour. So thanks very much, Tom, and we'll look forward to getting you back on the show.
And on that bombshell, have a lovely evening.
Do you live in Coatbridge? Do you live in one of the surrounding villages? Do you travel this road going back and forth to Glasgow? So, if like us you are outraged by this proposed tax on North Lanarkshire drivers, please get in touch. Leave a comment below or sign a petition.